Okay. Shalom, everybody, and welcome to Jews and Food. Today is February 23rd. We are very, very thrilled to be welcoming today a guest speaker all the way from Minnesota, Rabbi Morris Allen, who will be speaking to us about his founding of Magen Tzedek and work in Jewish food ethics, and also about how that impacts workers' ethics. And we've been talking about, from the last sessions, different developments in how we understand Jewish dietary law beyond just the letter of the law, what it really means to embrace the spirit of our Jewish values and tradition, and how recent thinkers have translated different kinds of intention and thought into action, and the different movements that have sprung out of this new consciousness that, as we also have noticed from our discussion of medieval sources, might not be so new necessarily, but just a new iteration of it. So without further ado, I want to turn it over to Rabbi Allen, who, again, we're just so honored that can join us today.
Well, it's really my honor to be able to teach in the presence of Rabbi Weiss, who was, as she said, a part of our community for many years while she was completing her PhD. And who we were privileged on several occasions to be able to share Shabbos dinner with and Yontif meals with, and a person who, from the time I met her, I realized would have a significant impact on the Jewish people. And her decision to go to the rabbinate, into the rabbinate, was something that I take as something of a great decision on her part and a benefit for all of us. And I am so appreciative that she asked me to share some time with you. I will also say that she is a mean musician and a great Torah reader. I hope she slowed down a little in her Torah reading, but it was always a little, it always made me a little anxious. I was sitting on the pulpit when Rabbi Weiss was laning, but it was always perfect. That being said, one of the things that I want to do is to frame this discussion. I spent many years working on Magen Tzedek, and for me, it remains probably the most disappointing aspect of my life that I was not able, my professional life, certainly in my Jewish life, I was not able to see it to fruition, though I still believe that it will one day appear, and because it is necessary and it is important, and it speaks to who we are to be as a people. And the failure of this undertaking, of which I deserve as much of the blame, as it were, as anyone else, is actually a tragedy for us as in the non-Orthodox world, because it once again denied us a place at the table around a subject and a matter that is central to who we are as Jews, and that is eating. Even Woody Allen, though you're not supposed to mention his name, knows that eating matters. There isn't a Woody Allen movie that doesn't address the importance of food. I often start off these talks with the mentioning of the year 1910, when perhaps the greatest invention, if I was Mel Brooks would say, of the last 2,000 years happened, and that was the invention of Crisco. Crisco in 1910, the invention of Crisco was greeted in the Jewish world with an unbelievable appearance by Procter and Gamble of proclaiming that after 4,000 years, the Hebrew race finally has a food product that will allow them to cook like everybody else. It's sort of an amazing thing to think about, that Crisco was seen for the Jewish people as a opportunity to move forward into the American mainstream, but the values underlying the rest of Torah about treatment of workers, of kindness to animals, about responsibility for the environment, all of that was somehow lost and has continued to be lost. We have been a people that has elevated the ritual performance of Jewish life at the expense of the ethical, and neither should receive primacy. I always say that the laws of Kashrut in Leviticus chapter 11 and the means by which we are to treat the worker found in Deuteronomy are not written in different size scripts. They're written in the exact same script in our Torah. And as a result, they deserve the exact same attention. We have failed in so many ways to live up to the best of who we are as a people in our ensuring that the production of kosher food is met with the ethics of how that production is supposed to take place. So let me share a little of the events. A little about me. I'm the youngest of 4 children. My father, we were very involved in the Jewish community when I was growing up, but my father had a very simple 3-part notion of what it meant to be a good Jew. To be a good Jew in my father's world was to love Israel, to keep kosher, and to vote Democratic. And that was my father's definition of what it meant really when it was all said and done. I think what he meant by that was that our people mattered, our rituals are central, and that our concern for the world needs to be evident. And but he summed it up in those 3 phrases. I think in my life, I've probably lived it out in any number of ways and continue to do so. But that being said, I began a congregation in 1986. I actually was the first rabbi of a community that was founded in 1985. And I came in 1986. And one of the tenets of our shul that I wanted to address was that I really wanted to elevate the role of Kashrut in the life of Midwest Jews. And I undertook that as a calling. And in the mid 90s, I received a little notoriety for a project that I started that was called Chew by Choice. And it was great. And, stages of Kashrut, I actually believe that once you're in the game, you're part of the Kashrut world. So, the elimination of pork products from your diet, that to me was already a statement that you understood that food mattered. And I kept pushing on this for a long time. And promoted Kashrut and promoted events that, featured Kashrut and the like. In 2005, the last kosher butcher shop in Minnesota, in St. Paul, closed. And I wondered about this as I watched butcher shops across the country close. When I lived in Lincoln, Nebraska, and was growing up, we didn't have a kosher butcher shop in Lincoln, but we had a kosher butcher shop in Omaha. There were 3 at the time. And there were 2 that my mother would never be caught dead in. And then there was Joe and Dave. And that was where we got our meat. But all of these butcher shops across the country began to close. And I was wondering about this. It seemed odd. How was it possible that suddenly butcher shops were closing across the country, such a central element of Jewish life? And then I realized that simultaneously there was the corporatization of kosher food production. in the past, when someone wanted kosher food or kosher meat, you had a butcher in all these little towns that had a relationship with the farmers, and who had a relationship with the processing plant. And the shoftim would go and they would get their cows and they'd bring it to the plant. And, on Tuesday mornings, every third week in the month, they would do the shechita, and the meat would be processed, the line would be cleared, and all of that would take place. Well, at some point, like everything else in America, the corporatization of food production impacted kosher food production as well. And it was a difficult thing to notice, because people, first of all, Kashrut became increasingly the domain of a few Jews, and second of all, people were happy that you could walk into a grocery store and buy a kosher product off the shelves, just like your non-Jewish or non-kosher neighbors did. When they went into Safeway, they could get their meat. You could walk into, your store and get your meat that was kosher. And in January of 2006, the local Chabad rabbi, it was actually a very difficult day in my life. It was the day of a funeral of a very close friend. He called me an hour before the funeral and he said, Morris, I want you to work with me. We're going to open up a kosher section at a store in St. Paul, and I want you to be my partner. And we're going to work with agri-processors in Postville, Iowa. And I said, Asher Ziongold, Rabbi Ziongold, I said, I'm happy to do this on one condition, that we could have non-glot meat in the marketplace in Minnesota. Because what also was happening was that suddenly the standard for kosher food consumption had become increasingly rigid. Glot became the determining factor. No one used to eat glot meat, right? In the 1950s, in the 1960s, in the 1970s, glot was, marginal in the kosher world. But as we allowed the corporatization of kashrut to take place, we also allowed what I call the Haredization of kashrut to take place, that increasingly standards that moved kashrut out of the mainstream of Jewish life to the margins of Jewish life became increasingly acceptable. I always tell the story that was told to me by an Orthodox rabbi in New York, that the day lettuce became treif was the day that Gristides salad bar opened on Wall Street. And that what happened was that from people who worked on Wall Street suddenly were having lunches with non-Jewish friends. They would go and they'd say, I'll get a salad at Gristides and we can go have lunch. But kashrut has a social control element in it. And because of that social control element, suddenly broccoli needed to be inspected. That's something my Bubby would roll over in her grave if she ever found out, that the broccoli she served me for all those years was not necessarily kosher in the eyes of some. But the fact of the matter is that this kind of thinking all merged, so that in 2006, when I said this to Rabbi Ziongold, that I wanted non-glot meat, he said, great, because agri-processors is really the largest producer of non-glot food, and I do the supervision for it. And I said, oh, this is great. So in March of 2006, Rabbi Ziongold and I drove down to Postville, Iowa with the supermarket people we were going to work with. And we had a tour of agri-processors owned by the Rabashkin family. And they couldn't have been nicer to us, mostly because Rabbi Ziongold was there and he was one of their mashgichim. And we made a deal. We're going to reestablish that non-glot meat can come into the Twin Cities marketplace. And as we were walking around the killing floor, though, I noticed something else. I noticed that almost every one of the employees in that plant were speaking Spanish, and they were Hispanic. And I said on the ride back, this might date me, that if James Sensenbrenner decided to implement this really shows you how far we've come as a society. This is 2006. If James Sensenbrenner decided to send home the 12 million non-documented workers tomorrow that he was advocating in Congress at that time, the entire kosher food industry would come to a stop. But that's the most I thought about it at that point. Pesach 2006, by the way, Rabbi Zeilengold and I were heroes. People called us, thanked us for lowering the price of kosher food, because once you have both glatt and non-glatt meat together, prices come down for both, like in any competition. People were really thrilled. I even got a call, I always share this story, from someone who was said, I'm Chabad, I'm not supposed to eat glatt, I'm non-glatt, but I have to tell you, the price differential was so great. Even I bought the Rabbi Zeilengold's non-glatt meat for Yontif. So yeah, I feel really good to this day that I did that. In May of 2006, the Forwards published a story about labor practices at that very plant, something that I had noticed but didn't, really put two and two together. And I had advocated from the time I went to Postville in March of 2006 through May of 2006, when that story came out, that the RA should be embracing of Rabashkins, and because they are the largest promoters of non-glatt meat. And I wasn't putting everything together. Why are butcher shops closing? Why is all of this taking place? And it all made sense after I read this story, that what had happened is that in the production of kosher food, we had become complicit in the violation of the rights of workers, and we had destroyed a environmental condition of a community called Postville, Iowa. I saw that Charlotte Denenberg posted about the book about Postville. That was all written as experiences prior to our arrival, but it is a very good book to read. That being said, in the summer of 2006, I convinced the Rabbinical Assembly and the United Synagogue to appoint a commission to go to Postville to find out if indeed the charges in the forwards in May of 2006 were indeed true or not. And I don't want to go into details on that, but it was really a frightening 3 days. We were followed. We had to shuttle workers from the plant to a city about 9 miles away to talk to us. We discovered horrific labor situations. The Rabashkins were pretty concerned that we were going to attack them. I made a pledge to them before I went that I would not share any of the conclusions. We would only share them with them. And in September of 2006, we made the following recommendations to the Rabashkins and to agri-processors. One, that there be a meeting between the senior management of Rabashkins and employees that we would facilitate with speakers who speak Spanish. Two, that OSHA would be allowed to come in, and we had already cleared this with the Iowa Department of Agriculture, which controlled OSHA in Iowa, that they would do an assessment of work environment, that there would be no publicity, that it would give 18 months to the Rabashkin family to make changes that they would recommend. And that the third recommendation was that all training material had to be in the vernacular, because there were no employees at senior management levels who spoke Spanish. and there were only employees in the plant who spoke Spanish. It was an unbelievably horrific situation. We then got endorsement from the Rabbinical Assembly for those principles. A letter was sent from the Rabbinical Assembly to Rabbashkins asking them to accept that. And in November of 2006, they officially rejected our request. And at that point, we decided to develop a certification project that would ensure that kosher food was produced at the highest ethical standards. That just as we wanted to be confident that the Kashrut was ritually correct, we wanted to be sure that the food we were eating was ethically correct. After all, in the Torah, even though it says 3 times you should not boil a kid in its mother's milk, 36 times it says you should not mistreat the stranger, for you were once strangers in a strange land. The reality is that in the production of kosher food, enabling us to ensure that we did not mix the milk of a mother with her calf and upholding the laws of Leviticus, we discovered, unfortunately, that we were abusing the stranger over and over again. I could go into great details, and I want to leave some time for questions, and so I want to just skip over that. We then developed what we first called Hechsher Tzedek, and it had a slow development, but it was gaining credence. And then in 2008, the waning days of the President Bush II administration, there was a major labor raid in Postville, and that got everyone concerned again in the larger community. We had already been on the ground for 2 years. We'd been working pretty effectively with the United Commercial Food Workers. We'd gone to lots of places to start seeing. We were developing standards. We worked with professors. But we needed to start raising money. The Nathan Cummings Foundation then gave us a significant amount of money, and we went to the conservative movement in 2008 and asked them to take this on as a major project of the conservative movement. Had that happened, it would have been unique because the conservative movement has historically resisted being in the marketplace of kashrut. When we decided that Kraft cheese was kosher, we also decided not to put a hechsher on it, which was a major mistake. We could have been in the marketplace for all these years with our certification of food. But we always had this false but lovely notion that we should leave kashrut to the Orthodox, and we will be beneficiaries, but we're not going to impose our standards. Well, we have standards. We have standards about kashrut that we uphold, and we have standards about ethics that we uphold. To our surprise and to our happiness, the movement took this on, and for a couple of years really attempted to support the development of Magen Tzedek. And we had great progress. We worked with a social auditing agency and developed probably the most comprehensive set of standards revolving around workers, animals, and the environment. And we tried them out in companies, in small companies. We did in-person test cases of our audit standards. And we were on our way. In fact, I still have one company even went so far as to produce a label that had the OU and the Magen Tzedek symbol on it as our test product, that this would be one of the first products that would carry both an OU and a Magen Tzedek. We even had at the time the total support, public support of Menachem Genack and the OU. But as you will hear in a minute, that public support was not met with private intervention. In 2011, we were about to certify a major player in the kosher food industry that produces mostly chicken, but we'll leave it at that. And we were in their plant in Pennsylvania. And the then owner of the plant said, "We want that on. We'll take it today." And we said, "Well, you can't just buy our symbol the way you can buy the OU symbol, as it were. We have this social audit that will come in April of 2011. We'll spend 2.5 days. We have independent auditors that will go all these things." We had already done the desk audit, which was they had to submit all their paperwork. We were really, I'm telling you, we were this close. It was so exciting. And 2 days before our team of auditors were to be there, a person in management said, "We have to postpone for a week." It seems that the Shach team, who are employed by KAJ, which is a Haredi Kashrut organization, have said they will walk off the floor if the conservative movement is allowed into the plant. And it was a little stunning. And so I called up Menachem Ganak, who is the head of the OU, and I said, "Menachem, this is the time for you to step forward. You have publicly, that brand of poultry, by the way, has both the OU and the KAJ on it. And I said, your insignia is on it. This is going to be a boom for everybody. We're not interested in anything to do with the ritual aspects of Kashrut. We're only concerned about the ethical constructs of our people. And we need you to intervene." At that point, the leadership of the RA asked us to take a step back, and they were going to handle it. And I will leave it at that. But Rabbi Ganak did not intervene with KAJ. And the week turned into 2 weeks, at which point I asked that the conservative movement organize a gate rally outside the plant at in this town in Pennsylvania, sort of near, I guess, Scranton, Wilkes-Barre, in that area, and that we would bring people in and we would just stand outside the gate that says, we want to certify this plant, and very peaceful. And I was turned down. And then I turned to a major social justice organization, Jewish social justice organization in this country that prides itself on being the voice of progress in America. And I asked their leadership and if we could organize a group of members of this organization and with their clarion call. And I was told that they would not protest in front of a union shop. And that was, it was one thing to organize trips to tomato growers in Florida, and you could ally yourself with union organizers, but to actually stand in front of a union shop and to say, we need to have access to this, that was too much for them to do. And that was the end of that experiment. It did create a long-standing bitterness in me towards certain leadership and voices that claim to speak for the underserved. And it, the last iteration of leadership of the Rabbinical Assembly, I think, had both of those organizations decided that this was a cause worth organizing around, Magen Tzedek would be a visible symbol on many kosher products at this point in time. Sadly, we had one last attempt at certification, and we had a great consumer product that was going to be would become then the first recipient of this certification. It's a product you all know. I bet it's a product that every one of you have have tasted, and we were really excited because we lost a major kosher player, that was uniquely kosher. This is just this product just has an OU on it, but it's not, non-Jews eat it too. One of the things we really wanted was to have a product that spoke directly to the Jewish people. It's like Levi's rye bread, alav hashalom, that we could have, a product that really spoke to the Jewish ethos, as it were. But we would take a consumer staple product that all of us have eaten and consumed. And we went in to do our analysis. We had done our desk audit. It looked great. And this is what we discovered. This company, the people who worked for this company, the workers were great. The environmental standards were met. There was no animal issues because it was not an animal product. So everything looked great. But what we discovered when our auditors went in, was that there were two lines of workers in this plant. There were workers that were employed by the company, and there were contract workers that were employed by a contract agency. Almost all the workers that were employed by the company were white, and almost all the workers that were employed by the contract agency were Hispanic or African American or Somali, but people of color. All the workers that were employed by the company, which we had reviewed all of their standards, were well paid, had great hours, great benefits, all of the issues which we raised in the production of food. All of the contract workers were working without benefits, were hourly employees, and some of these contract workers, this was, I don't know if it was more egregious than the fact that the pay scales were different, but the most egregious is that many of these contract workers had been contract workers for this company for 15 years and never hired by the company. And we could have certified the employees of this company, the labor force of this company, but we would have been immediately accused of correctly that we were ignoring the fact that in the production of food, seasonal employees who were contracted were treated differently. And not only were seasonal employees treated differently, the seasonal employees tended to be minorities, and the full labor force tended to be people who were white. And we felt that it was not at all possible at that point to certify such a situation. And at that point, having expended a great deal of money and a great deal of effort, and increasingly finding a closed door in our own movement towards hanging in and doing the work that was necessary to get this moving forward, we had to suspend our efforts. But the fact of the matter is that when the story of Magen Tzedek is finally told 100 years later, and someone will say Crisco in 1910 was a big invention, the work that was done 100 years later to try and move ethics into the production of kosher food will also be a story worth telling and a date worth remembering. I do want to say that there were some really heroes in this. My colleague, Rabbi Michael Siegel, who's the rabbi of Anshe Emet in Chicago, really, he was a fighter for this. And, there were many colleagues that really, we rallied. I think for the high holidays in 2008 or 2009, there might have been over 200 congregations that had rabbis that delivered high holiday sermons about Magen Tzedek. It was really a major issue, and it remains for me, a major issue. I'm pretty intrigued by the evolution of plant-based meat, by the way, and actually believe that this is an opening that I want to explore now that I'm fully retired, on how to certify the production of that food. But like everything else in this world, it takes money, it takes time, and it ultimately takes interest. And so when Rabbi Weiss said that she was teaching this material and asked me if I would spend a few minutes talking with you, I jumped at the chance. This is a story that is critically important to understanding where we sit in the Jewish world today, and the power we still have if we only are willing to raise our voice. It's really an amazing story, both of great success. I have to tell you, I still get emails from people that say, which products have the Mogen Tzedek on it? And I have to say none. But I will tell you that there are better food producers than not. But the world of Kashrut is a very, Wolf Kelman, alav hashalom, who was the executive vice president of the Rabbinical Assembly for many years, was the reason that the conservative movement did not get involved in Kashrut, because he said Kashrut supervision is like the mafia, and if you step on someone's toes, they're going to come after you. And David Zissenwein, who is a rabbi in Sioux City, Iowa, once tried to learn how to do supervision, because Sioux City was a big meat producer, kosher meat producer, and had a brick thrown through his window one Friday night as the family was sitting at dinner. And that was the end of Rabbi Zissenwein's engagement with Kashrut. It is a very difficult business. But two last stories. First of all, it's a major growth industry in the food business. And I will end with this before there are questions, before someone tells you to wake up, that the fact of the matter is that how many of you remember Hydrox? Hydrox were the Jewish Oreos, right? Hydrox were the Jewish Oreos. I happen to think they stayed longer in milk than Oreos, but what am I to say? But they were not Oreos. In 1997, a person who worked with us, Joe Regenstein, who was a food scientist at Cornell University, and a wonderful, wonderful human being, and who became our lead developer of concerns. He figured out with Nabisco how to ensure that the taste of Oreos could be the same if it was made with a form of Crisco, by the way, as opposed to lard. He is a hero to hundreds of thousands of little Jewish kids in Muncie, New York, and wherever Jews buy Oreo cookies because now they're kosher. They have no idea who Joe Regenstein is, but he's the reason that Oreos are kosher. He was a food scientist and figured it all out. The loss was Hydrox went belly up. I think they've reestablished themselves, but the original Hydrox, because there was no market for them anymore. You didn't have to buy Hydrox. You could buy Oreos. That's what happens with the corporatization of kosher food. Joe Regenstein is a hero because, why shouldn't our kids have Oreo cookies? Why should they have to have Hydrox in their lunch at school? But the corporatization, the role that Nabisco plays in the corporatization of food, means that other producers leave the market. The fact that the kosher certifiers, basically 3 or 4, 5 players at most, control what you are able to eat, means that when we no longer are able to have Dannon yogurt automatically certified kosher for Passover because it's not Chalav Yisroel. So the world of corporatization and Haridization, of making sure that fewer people are producing more of the kosher food, and the standards that are employed are only the standards that meet the most rigid number of Jews, has created a place where the openness of the kosher food industry has collapsed. Frank Butler, and with this I'll close, was the first person ever hired to certify a national product. He was certified by Heinz, and the first product certified by Heinz, does anyone know? You're all on mute, which is probably good. I haven't heard what you've been grousing about, but the first product that was certified by Heinz was vegetarian baked beans, and it was certified. There's a disagreement whether it was in the late 20s, but by 1935, Heinz vegetarian baked beans was the first nationwide product with a OU symbol on it. Up until that time, you could, rabbis would say, your rabbi said, oh, Crisco was kosher, but there was no symbol, there was no marketing, there was no branding. Heinz vegetarian baked beans was the first kosher product. From that time forward, once people realized there was money to be made in labels, to this day, we have lost a great deal of control over our ability to ensure that the best of who we are as a people and how we are to eat, and the best of who we are as a people and how we are to treat workers, the environment, and animals has been lost to us. So that's the story. I'm happy to take some questions.
Well, I first of all want to just thank you so much, Rabbi Allen, for that incredible history and just a lot of details that I didn't even know about leading up to the creation of Maggid Tzedek. And I want to add in there, because you didn't mention this, because Rabbi Allen mentioned that this whole field is very contentious and potentially dangerous at times. And Rabbi Allen actually had received death threats in his work in doing this. And so I just want to acknowledge the tremendous bravery and the fact that he persisted despite that, which to me really is the mark of real character and leadership.
Yeah, I am a real character. That's a perfect description of me, Rabbi Weiss. I am a real character,
that was meant lovingly.
Right. I know. Worse than the death threats, although they were pretty frightening. Were the things that were said about me in print, in publications, in the Orthodox world. While I was doing a funeral for my aunt in Omaha, Nebraska in 2008, simultaneous to that, as I was giving the eulogy, the Rabashkin family, through their PR firm, 5W, Ron Tarosian, was, I can't remember, cat socking, what they were putting out false tweets. Well, they weren't tweets, false posts on social media, on Facebook, in my name, that I was attacking Orthodox Jews, this, that, and the other thing. So simultaneous to doing a funeral, and it was great. To this day, my cousins always joke that I was delivering this lovely eulogy for their mother at the same time that I was posting on Facebook. We had to sue Ron Tarosian and 5WPR, which was the same PR firm, by the way, that had connections to the formation of Tav Yosher, Rabbi Avi Weiss. It's a really complicated thing. All of those complications are minor compared to the failure of will that I think that we demonstrated when push needed to come to shove and it wasn't there.
I will just jump in and say, though, that this is not a closed book, and part of this conversation, part of the reason I wanted to have it, and I hope to encourage other colleagues to have it as well, and I will, is that this is not the book is not closed, and I think this is the beginning of a conversation, and there are going to be many different iterations of this that will be along the way. But really, Rabbi Allen put this into motion, and in fact, as I mentioned last week, this movement really inspired other movements within like the so-called open Orthodox movement who developed this and had other kinds of connections and whatnot. It doesn't even matter. But the point is that it creates within the Jewish community structures of accountability that really put our mouth where our values are and our money where our values are. And I posted, some of you might have seen it, I posted from this past week, there was an article in the Times of Israel from Devorah Kimmelman-Block, who's head of Cole, who was talking about what she calls humane washing. And if you recall last week in our session, we looked at a few websites to basically do an open audit of the language of some of these kosher food producers, meat producers, and how they package for more conscientious consumers their products to entice them, even when their labor practices, when their meat raising practices are not particularly at the highest standard, they try to do window dressing. And so she's decrying this in this article from last week. If you haven't seen it, I posted it. I can also email it after the class. And I'm wondering, Rabbi Allen talks about, now this is a question for you, Rabbi Allen. You went with your own delegation, you went to go and survey the plants. And I'm wondering, for all of us who are in the process of consuming kosher foods, as consumers, as Jewish communities across the country, what measures you would recommend we take to ensure that the sources of our, whether it's our meat products or whatever other kosher certified products, really are up to the standards that we want to live by?
So a few things. First of all, it's interesting. First of all, Devorah Kimmelman-Block and Cole Foods is certainly a great organization. I won't go into, we worked really hard to try to get them to be a Magen Tzedek certifying, but she at the time was using, and I don't know what she does now, was using a meat processing plant that would have to be certified, that she was unwilling to demand that her meat, even though it's great organic food, would meet the standards. What's interesting about that is that when I used to teach this, I used to show kosher, organic, local, Cole Foods, and another company, their social justice or whatever it's called, social advocacy websites, and their language mirrored the language that we used in Magen Tzedek. I will send Raish the slide presentation, and she can see this, and if she chooses to share it, she can't. Rabbi Weiss, excuse me, and I will. But so it is true. You can say lots of things on packaging, and we all are victims of the consumerist title or consumerist bent. In terms of kashrut, I have to say that, it has been now many years, too many years, since I've kept up with all of the plants. I will tell you that Hebrew national production of kosher food, which receives very little support in the mainstream kosher world, in the Orthodox world, you'll notice that in grocery stores, when kosher products are sold, like there'll be Rabashkin's hot dogs or, whatever the hot dogs, but Hebrew national will be in the treif hot dog section, even though it has a hechsher on it. And that's because the people who place kosher food will insist that Hebrew national products not be placed near their products. And there's a lot of control in where you get shelf space in supermarkets. Those of you who might have had parents or grandparents or yourselves are in the grocery business know that people pay for shelf space, and what eye level is better than way down below, and all those kinds of things. So those are all issues. But Hebrew National Triangle K certified was one of the places that actually used much more humane slaughtering practices for animals than do most kosher producers. I would always ask that you should seek to make sure that you source where meat comes from. That would be, in terms of kosher meat, source where it comes from. If you think kosher meat practices in America are in need of certification, if your meat comes from Argentina or South America, where a lot of kosher meat is imported from, you can be assured that hoisting and shackling is taking place, that animal welfare is non-existent, but the shechita was done really appropriately, and those are questions that people need to ask. You know, if we were to do Mogen Tzedek today, if I were able to find the resources to do it, what we would do is to develop an app, and we would not really need to certify. What we would need to do is to list all of the things, to list sourcing, where foods come from, what the plant is, allowing individuals the right to find out you can call up a plant, tell me what your labor story is, tell me, people want to know, what do we mean by the environment? Postville, Iowa, Senator Tom Harkin was a great senator in Iowa, and a great progressive voice, and probably a Democrat that I gave money to at some point. But Tom Harkin is a player, unfortunately, in the Postville story, and not on the good side, because what happens, when my mother used to go to Omaha to buy kosher meat, the butcher Joe or Dave would say, Annie, do you want it salted already, or you're going to salt it at home? And my mother would say, what's the price difference? And, look, when my parents lived in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, their meat was shipped from Denver. But when we lived in Denver, so my mother would say, well, what's the difference? And Joe or Dave would say, oh, 3 cents, 6 cents a pound, whatever it was. My mother would say, well, if I have time, I can save 6 cents a pound. She has a family of 4 kids, save money. My mother would salt the meat in the basement in our house. And when she was done salting it, she would take it out and dump it down the drain in the laundry room, and so, no big deal, some salt and blood went into the water system. But when you're salting in a corporate development of chicken, when you're shechting 6,000 chickens a day, 30,000 chickens a week, or sometimes 36,000 chickens a week, and you're shechting 500 head of cattle a day, and you have to salt all that food, and you have to rinse it off. The water treatment plant in Postville, Iowa was destroyed. So instead of building a new water treatment plant for Postville, Iowa, Senator Harkin has a better idea. He's going to build a new water treatment plant in Postville, Iowa, but it's going to be on the grounds of agri-processors. And then they'll fix the old water treatment plant in Postville, Iowa, but agri-processors has a state-of-the-art water treatment plant that they use exclusively for themselves. This is what happens when money and religion and politics all merge, and it's what it is. But what I can say, and what I do believe, is that we are, the story is not done. I agree with Rabbi Weiss on that. The story is not done. It may be done for me. It did take a toll, but I was simultaneously also running a congregation, and I think I was running it pretty well. I had spoken earlier with Helene that, I said my wife deserves credit for raising 3 wonderful kids, and she said, well, I'm sure you had a role to play in it, and I did, but it also was the fact that this was a passion of mine. I was convinced I was convinced, Pesach 2011, at the start of our Seder, I said, a year from now, we're going to have kosher LePesach Magen Tzedek food. And we didn't. And, I feel bad because I really believe that it would have changed so much about American Jewish life. But the forces allied against it were just too great.
I mean, I'll just say that nothing truly worth doing, nothing that's really worthy of our attentions and our efforts and energies isn't without a tremendous risk. And I think that very much is in this category. And again, the story continues. I want to make sure before we wrap, I want to make sure if any has questions, comments, I'm sure you have many questions. Steve has a question, go for it.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so I really enjoyed your presentation. It just
Thank
made me
you.
think a lot of things. Maybe encapsulated in that Billy Joel song, It's a Matter of Trust, because you're talking about like the food, the food preparers, but then you get to restaurants and you get to trust, like, what does that label mean? If you're in a restaurant, who's doing the cooking? What practices are they upholding? I remember there's a story long ago, you mentioned Muncie, where some butcher was taking Purdue chickens and taking away the label and putting a kosher label on it. So where did that trust come from in the Jewish community? Like, oh, that label means everything. And you just have to have the faith that whatever's happening is the right thing, and you're taking the bite out of that food, trusting. And also the whole thing about you mentioned placement, but I noticed in a lot of grocery stores now you're seeing like products from Israel, and sometimes I think people perceive that they're more kosher. But the whole thing about ethics and all of that, the staff that's preparing the food, are they getting paid as much as, so they have all those other issues as well. We see hot dog carts and it says kosher. Can you trust that there's no packaging, and you're saying it's, Costco used to have kosher hot dogs. So just where does that come from? The faith in believing in that label and trusting who's selling it, and then, saying, okay, I'll take this hot dog, who knows what it is, but it says it's kosher.
Steve, those are three excellent questions. And let me just say that trust, part of the problem with trust is that there is no way in which trust is injected into the system from the start. Here's an exercise that you can do on your own. Go to the OU website, go to the Kuf K website, go to Star K website, and try to find on their website their standards for certifying a product. Try to find out what differentiates a Star K product from an OU product. And you will see that if they say anything, they say either exactly the same thing or they say nothing, because you can't find their standards. Because the standards, while theoretically objective, are really subjective. And so trust is by definition not injected into the process. When you have a person who is certifying a product and whose money comes from whether or not that product sells, you have a situation where they are what we would call nogea b'davar. If that product, they have a conflict of interest. If that product isn't certified as kosher, they're not going to be paid. Or if people don't trust them, they're not going to be paid. Well, the way in which you can ensure trust is to create distrust for the person next to you. So the reason Triangle K isn't accepted oftentimes in the kosher world is the rumor mill. Oh, Rabbi Wallbach, he accepts gelatin, or I don't know. I haven't seen it myself, but that's what they say. And so you create distrust. The whole premise of kosher certification is built on the lack of trust. And you need a symbol to indicate that it is kosher. When a plum in the summer has an OU on it, you have to wonder, oh my God, was the plum last summer without the OU on it not kosher? When a water bottle is certified kosher, right, you say, what's going on here? If when Palmolive, when Procter and Gamble decided to certify soap, it was an easy thing to certify. And you can read in the 50s when the OU said, if we could certify dishwasher soap, which costs us very little to certify, it can underwrite the business model for certifying food, which is more expensive. And so suddenly, look, yes, there are finishing products on this and that, but aluminum foil has a hechsher on it. The last time I ate aluminum foil, I hated it, right? But it was really, that's what happens. So Steve, the whole premise of your question is at the heart of the situation with Kashrut. Unfortunately, what is a beautiful construct of how to live, to always bring God into the process. Which drawer? I can still hear my mother, saying to me, Morris, that's the wrong drawer, like when I was a little boy, and she'd be all frantic, and I would think, oh my God, the wrath of God is going to come down on me. It was bad enough that it was Annie Allen's wrath. But anyway, the fact of the matter is, my mother is 100, and she, she would appreciate being remarked about. Just so you know, I have great love and admiration for my mom. But the fact of the matter is, this beautiful construct of bringing holiness into the act of eating has been undermined by by the core of Steve's question: trust, right? I trust every kosher symbol. That's a personal thing I do. Any symbol that says it's kosher, I trust, because you know what? If it's not, it's their sin, not mine. They said it's kosher. I believe it. And I encourage people to do the same, because if something says it's kosher, I want to believe it. I don't want to believe that there is a reason for me to doubt its kashrut, because once I do start believing that, then I start losing the meaning of kashrut in general. So that's my answer, Steve. Believe.
One other unrelated question, but like, imagine like a kosher airline meal, how that thing is like triple sealed. And
Right.
I don't know why they do that, because it's possible to open those things. And if you buy something with very loose packaging, that's also kosher. So that metaphor of that airline meal, they really want, it's impenetrable, and it has all this information inside of it.
Right.
You just buy a hot dog out of a hot dog cart, and that's also kosher. So you have to trust which one is going to be more trusting. It's very interesting, that the symbolism. But you've got to have faith in the server, in who's preparing the food when you're just buying it as food in a restaurant or anything else. So you have to go with the faith, and then just go with it and believe that you're eating a kosher product.
Right. And, I think that the airline packaging has to do with it was before there were internet access on the airline. So it took you a lot longer, and it allowed the flight to go quicker because you were going through the packaging over and over. And you're right, by the time you got to it, it says, this is mazonis, this is lechem, this is, you have no idea. And then if you ate it, that was the biggest mistake. Because it wasn't worth it in the first place. But all that being said is that any symbol that says it's kosher, it's fine. New York State tried to, I don't know if it's still the state law or not, but a store could not say it was kosher unless it was. Milk is a great issue. The certification of milk has to meet all standards that by definition make it kosher, right? By all kosher definitions, but yet there are still milk that is certified. Not just Chalav Yisrael milk, but regular, dairy milk. But all of this stuff is that there's money there, and money breeds distrust. And my personal ethic on this is that we need to eliminate that distrust in the system. And the way to do that is to ensure that both the ritual and the ethical constructs of who we are valued and upheld.
Amen. Amen. Just any last final questions, comments? I know we're a little bit over time, but I want to make sure everyone has a chance to, because this is a rare opportunity. So just jump in if you have anything you want, last question or comment.
So before I leave, I just want to say that, this is great that we got to spend an hour talking about food, but the world in which we're living is a really tough world. And I just want to end with a prayer for peace, that we say the day when war and bloodshed cease and a great peace will embrace the whole world. Let justice and righteousness flow like a mighty stream. Let God's peace fill the earth as the waters fill the sea. And let's all say amen. So
Amen.
let's pray for peace. And thank you all. Feel free to reach out to me. You can always reach me, my information. Everyone in my show always had my cell phone number. I was never embarrassed to take a call. And my email is my name, Mo, Joe, Morris, Jonathan, my birthday, February 10th, Alan, mojo210al@gmail.com. Feel free to write me anytime. Thank you so much, Rabbi Weiss. Thank you. Say hello to Rabbi Rain.
Thank you so much. Absolutely.
Thank you all. It was my pleasure.
This is wonderful. Yesh Koach. This was fabulous.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. That was wonderful. Wow.
Thank you, guys.
That's great.
I told you it'd be a special treat.